Thank you so much for staying with us here on First Look this Tuesday morning. It might be a little difficult waking up to us this morning because of the long weekend, but let's hope that you are up and having a productive start to the week. All right, it's time for our first interview in our information segment this morning. We continue our countdown to SIDS 4, that major international conference to take place right here in this country between May 27 and 30. Now, one of the organizations that will be involved in SIDS 4, heavily involved that is, will be the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute. That's the CANARI, Caribbean Natural Resources Institute. Executive Director Nicole Leotaud joins us online now, as they will be involved not only in SIDS but in some pre-activities before the start of SIDS. In fact, they're making their way to Antigua and Barbuda tomorrow to work in conjunction with the Environmental Awareness Group, the EAG. Ms. Leotaud, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us by Zoom today.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Let's begin by introducing us to the organization, CANARI. Tell us more about it, and then perhaps you can link that into how you will be involved in SIDS 4 this year.
Great. So CANARI, or the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, is a non-profit technical institute. We work across the entire Caribbean. We're headquartered in Trinidad and Tobago, but we have staff in other countries in the Caribbean. And we're around for 35 years, and we've been doing a lot of work with partner civil society organizations like the Environmental Awareness Group. EAG in Antigua and Barbuda is one of our great partners. And our mission is about sustainable development, but the part of sustainable development we focus on is stewardship, or taking care of nature to benefit people. So we do work on climate change and disaster risk resilience, on biodiversity and ecosystems, on equity and justice, and on participatory governance.
And in terms of the conference itself, will you be hosting any sessions? Will you be involved in any roundtables? What will be your interest and involvement exactly?
Great. So we're doing quite a lot. We have a big team coming to Antigua tomorrow. We're very, very excited. In terms of preparation for the conference, we're partnering with EAG, the Environmental Awareness Group, to facilitate a Caribbean Civil Society Summit on Thursday and Friday. And this is really to bring Caribbean civil society from across the region together so we can work together to prepare to engage next week at the conference. So we need to be really strategic and thinking about what are the messages we want to take forward and what we want to do together. And in terms of at the conference, CANARI is involved in, I think, 4 side events with partners, looking at things like climate finance and making sure it's getting to the local level to make a difference, looking at the right to a healthy environment as a basic human right, and looking at blue economy, but specifically blue tourism, and how community-based tourism can really deliver economic development.
Organization Summit, does that tie in well with your mandate at CANARI?
Yes, it does, of course. So one of the big things that we have done that we're very excited about is in the lead up to this conference, which is of course an intergovernmental conference, and there's an intergovernmental political document, the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS, or ABAS, which had already been negotiated and will be launched next week. But in the lead up to that, we realized that civil society, and Caribbean civil society in particular, which is where we work, really was not able to get involved to the level that they need to, given the important role that they are playing in delivering sustainable development. So what CANARI did is work since January and February to hold dialogues with Caribbean civil society, over 120 organizations, and develop a position paper called The Caribbean We Want, really trying to define what the priorities for sustainable development are for Caribbean civil society. And then at SIDS 4 next week, we're really going to be sharing those messages with partners and trying to influence the agenda.
Excellent. Ms. Leotaud, we also note from your bio you've done some work with the Escazú Agreement. We've talked at length about that here at this station. Have you found it difficult for society in general, civil society, to get involved, to realize that some of the power rests in their hands?
Sure. Yeah, it is quite difficult. And I mean, there's tremendous interest in Caribbean civil society. Of course, they're doing a lot on sustainable development, but of course, capacity is a challenge, and getting the right type of financing to civil society is one of the big challenges that we're actually pushing in the Caribbean. We want that better financing, more appropriate financing needs to get to civil society to help them build strong organizations and to help them move away from these small projects to a more programmatic, long-term strategic stream of work. So that is a problem for civil society across the region that we're hoping we can help to address.
And in terms of at the grassroots level, because we have been doing our best to drum up support for the conference, to sensitize the general public about its importance. What about your work with people on the ground and getting them sensitized to the major issues, the green economy, the preserving of terrestrial and marine ecosystems in general?
Well, the people on the ground are excellent. They're doing excellent work. I mean, for example, we have worked with two organizations in Barbuda. We've supported the Barbudan Fisherfolk Association, and we also know about the Barbuda Go, two community organizations which have done excellent work to restore the Codrington Lagoon after Hurricane Irma, really thinking about nature-based solutions, which is where CANARI works. So I would say we really recognize and value the tremendous work being done at the local community level. And what these organizations need is support, is partnerships to really help them amplify their work.
All right, let's talk about the summit itself, and perhaps you can talk about target audiences, registration, how people and organizations can get involved in the summit.
Well, we're all organized. It's starting on Thursday, so registration is all full. We have about 40 participants, I think. So Caribbean civil society organizations from across the region, as well as several, of course, from Antigua and Barbuda. And what we're going to be doing is really sitting together and sharing, what are we doing? What are our priorities individually? And then how can we work together collectively to engage governments and other donors, funders, development partners to better support civil society to perform our role in sustainable development. So it's really going to be a workshop preparing us for next week.
Could potentially a position paper come out of the meetings? When we like talking about outcomes from these meetings. What can you tell us about what potentially will result?
So a lot of our focus will be on the Caribbean We Want position paper and the 4 messages. And I could share with you what the 4 messages are.
Indeed.
Very briefly. I mean, the first one really looks at how can governments and development partners better support civil society to have a whole of society approach to sustainable development and leverage what civil society brings, the resources and expertise. The second message is about inclusive economic development. Really more support to local micro and small enterprises, especially the enterprises that have environmental and social objectives. They need special support to really drive an inclusive and sustainable economic development in the Caribbean. The third message is about justice. So you talked about Escazú Agreement. Of course, the right to a healthy environment and environmental justice is an issue in the Caribbean. Also climate justice. People are marginalized and vulnerable. But how does this intersect with gender justice, other social and economic justice issues? So that's an important area of work for civil society. And finally, how can we ensure that development in the Caribbean includes nature and includes social development objectives? And so any development we do is building resilience, is building sustainability, is protecting the environment, is helping people. So we need to really transform our approach to development. So those are the big messages from civil society. And then we want out of the conference then, not only for those messages to be listened to, but how can we develop partnerships coming out of CIDS4 to implement the ABAS agenda, to implement sustainable development in partnership with governments and others for the next 10 years.
Excellent. Now, let's talk about impact on going back to people on the ground, the importance of SIDS4 and the civil society organization summit. How can they benefit the individual, the normal person listening to this interview? What can they hope can result that would be of direct or perhaps indirect benefit to them, as you know, Antigua and Barbuda is big on building back better post-Irma, the hurricane, and post-COVID-19 as well?
I mean, what I would tell citizens is, you know, we all need to get involved in sustainable development. It's not an issue you should leave to your governments. And I know people in Antigua and Barbuda are very vocal about what their priorities are. Using the media, you know, the media plays a huge role in terms of reaching out to citizens, raising awareness, but also getting those voices heard at the national level. And civil society organizations like the Environmental Awareness Group play an important role, not only in educating and engaging the public, but getting those voices heard at the national level in decision making. So I would say, you know, citizens engage with the media, engage with other civil society organizations, get involved in the issues and get your priorities heard.
And I also want to ask, because you did mention it briefly in terms of the accomplishment of the Sustainable Development Goals, and Antigua and Barbuda looking forward to accomplishing as many of those as we possibly can. We talk about a lot about international partners, the Human Rights Council, UNDP, etc. What is it that your organization is perhaps doing for Antigua and Barbuda and other countries across the region in ensuring that we can accomplish those?
I mean, we are doing our part. We are contributing. Of course, it's a big effort. CANARI does work, especially supporting civil society in capacity building. So we do both technical capacity building in areas they want to work in, for example, climate change resilience building, nature-based solutions, but also in helping civil society to build strong organizations. But we also do a tremendous amount, of course, of research and policy work. So we're able to help take those civil society voices to the national level, to the regional level, to the global level. And so CANARI's work is all about partnerships.
And as you talked about partners, perhaps you'd want to highlight some of those partners you work with, stakeholders, whether in Antigua, Barbuda, or generally.
Yeah, so we have a huge diversity of partners. CANARI works with civil society organizations. I've given some examples in Antigua and Barbuda. But also we work with governments, we partner with governments, and we have a very good partnership with the Department of Environment in Antigua and Barbuda, for example, and have worked closely with them on climate change and other issues. At the sub-regional level, we have a close partnership with the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Commission, which plays a huge role in the Eastern Caribbean, and we are supporting them and engaging with them to deliver their priorities with governments. And then at the regional level, of course, we have partners like the CARICOM Secretariat, like the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, the CARICOM technical agencies. At the global level, we have partnerships, for example, with the International Institute for Environment and Development, which is a think tank based in London, but does a lot of work really supporting local level sustainable development.
Right, so now that we've talked about the summit, perhaps I can get your thoughts on an issue, of course, because a lot of the thought on the ground is that amid all the work that we do, it's a very pessimistic view that a lot of what transpires in the region, not only Antigua and Barbuda, is based on what's done extra-regionally. And so some have taken like an ostrich with its head in the sand approach to things, that no matter what we do, things are going to get worse. What is it that your organization, or perhaps you think about the work that we can continue to do despite some of the exogenous shocks that we experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. It is very challenging and frustrating. I mean, SIDS responsible for a very tiny amount, less than 1% of global greenhouse gases, but of course are very vulnerable to climate change. And so you can get very frustrated and feel disempowered. I can understand that. I mean, I would say you have to work at multiple levels. So you have to work on the ground, really building resilience, protecting nature, doing all the things to address flooding and so on. But also the advocacy at the global level is very important. And trying, for example, the Caribbean governments at SIDS4 will be doing a lot of advocacy on climate finance, saying to the developed countries, you need to fulfill your commitments, your obligations, to deliver climate finance so that we can adapt to climate change. We are seeing the effects, we're feeling the effects today, and we need climate finance. But the second level, which CANARI and other civil society organizations are advocating for, is that some of that climate finance now must be channeled to the ground, to people, to community organizations who really can do the work to build their own resilience in their communities.
So is it fair that you're hoping that lots get talked about, cemented, where the loss and damage fund is concerned, or maybe debt for finance swapping, how that works? Is that what you perhaps hope will come out of these meetings?
I think out of these meetings, those will be key issues that are discussed. They're ongoing in the global agenda, and they are part of the SID Sustainable Development Agenda for the next 10 years, really putting more attention to these issues and really getting developed countries to provide the support that they committed to. So I think that will be one of the big areas of focus for this meeting. If you look at the side events, you know, there are about 175 side events. So this is where the real digging into the meat of the issues is going to happen, I think. The discussions among partners on what are the issues, what are we learning, what are we recommending, and how can we work together? So that will be a hot topic, climate finance.
Indeed. All right, Ms. Leotaud, let me tell you, any organization who works with the EAG is becoming a favorite of ours, because the EAG on the ground here in Antigua and Barbuda are very famous for the hard work that they do to ensure that there is environmental conservation and preservation, whether on the ground or in the sea. So let me applaud you and CANARI, of course, for being involved and for the heavy work you'll be doing in terms of the summit. It's coming up on the 23rd and 24th. You fly in tomorrow, is that correct?
We fly in tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it.
Indeed. All right. I look forward to issuing you a warm welcome as well. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate this conversation with you today.
Thank you for having me, Antigua and Barbuda.
All right. That was Ms. Nicole Leotaud. She is Executive Director of CANARI, the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute. Of course, here organizing alongside the Environmental Awareness Group, the EAG, the Civil Society Organization Summit coming up on May 23 and 24. One of the pre-events to SIDS 4 starting next week on the 27th. That, of course, will be next week, Monday. All right, that's it for our information segment this hour. When we come back, we'll have the Angels Creations, the Angels Birthday Corner. But let's take a break. We'll see you after this.